There is a certain kind of footballer who does not announce himself. No thunderous sprint, no muscular shoulder charge, no celebration that fills the sky. Instead, there is just the ball, moving calmly from foot to foot, from teammate to teammate. And somehow, almost magically, the game begins to slow down around him. David Silva was that kind of player. He was known as El Mago, the magician, not because he performed tricks, but because of the quiet way he made complicated things look simple. He was part of Spain's golden generation, one of the finest international football teams the world had ever seen. He spent a decade at Manchester City, helping transform a club that had waited decades for success into one of the most dominant teams in English football. And through all of it, he moved through the game with a kind of calm intelligence that was rarely matched. This is his story. And as you listen, there is nothing you need to do, nowhere you need to be. Just settle back, breathe slowly, and let the story carry you. The island of Gran Canaria sits in the Atlantic Ocean, off the northwest coast of Africa. It belongs to Spain, but in many ways, it feels like its own world. The climate is warm and steady throughout the year. The coastline is long and varied. Dark volcanic beaches in some places, pale sandy coves in others. The towns are small and quiet. Life moves at a gentle pace. In the southern part of the island, along the coast, there is a small town called Aguinegin. It is not a large place. It has a harbour, a modest fishing history, and the kind of unhurried atmosphere that comes from living close to the sea. The streets are narrow. The evenings are warm. The sound of the ocean is never far away. It was here, on the 8th of January, 1986, that David Josue Ximenez Silva was born. He grew up in a modest household. His family was not wealthy, but life on the island had its own kind of richness. The weather was kind. The community was close. And for a young boy who loved football, there were always places to play. The streets and open areas near the coast served as informal football pitches, small-sided games with whatever goals could be arranged and however many players happened to be nearby. These early games were unstructured and free. There were no formations to memorize, no coaches watching from the touchline. Just children playing, learning the rhythm of the ball, discovering what they could do with it. David was small, even by the standards of young boys his age. He was not fast. He was not powerful. But he had something that is difficult to teach and even more difficult to describe. He had a natural sense of where the ball should go next, a kind of quiet awareness of space, of movement, of the right moment. While other children were reacting to the ball, David seemed already to be thinking one step ahead. He played with older boys when he could. Playing with older, stronger, faster players is one of the most effective ways a young footballer can develop. You learn to protect the ball. You learn to move it quickly. You learn that standing still gets you nowhere. And you learn, over time, to find the little gaps and angles that others miss. David was learning all of those things, out on the warm coastal streets of southern Gran Canaria, in the quiet evenings of his childhood. He was not the loudest child on the pitch. He did not shout or argue or demand the ball. He simply played. And when the ball came to him, he used it well. Football in the Canary Islands has always had its own character. The two main islands, Gran Canaria and Tenerife, have their own professional clubs competing in Spain's top divisions, and there is genuine passion for the game throughout the archipelago. But in terms of football infrastructure, the Canary Islands have always operated somewhat outside the main centers of Spanish football, which are concentrated on the mainland, in Madrid, Barcelona, Valencia, Seville, For a talented young player growing up on an island, the path forward usually meant leaving home. David began attracting attention through youth football on the island. He was developing into something noticeable, a small, technically gifted midfielder who saw the game differently. Those qualities were enough to bring him to the attention of scouts and youth coaches who were always looking for players with genuine technical ability. By his early teenage years, David had joined the youth academy of UD Las Palmas, the professional club based in Las Palmas de Gran Canaria, the island's capital city. Las Palmas had a history of developing technically refined players. The club placed an emphasis on technical quality and footballing intelligence, which suited David well. He trained at the Las Palmas Academy through his early teenage years. The move from informal street football to structured academy training brought new demands. There were sessions focused specifically on technique. There was tactical work, learning how to move without the ball, when to press, when to hold a position, how to circulate the ball efficiently in small groups. David absorbed all of it. His natural ability gave him a foundation, and the structured environment helped him begin to build a more complete understanding of the game. But the Canary Islands could only take him so far. To reach the highest levels of Spanish football, he would need to move to the mainland. Valencia is one of Spain's great football cities. It sits on the eastern coast, looking out over the Mediterranean Sea. The city is warm, bright, and proud of its footballing history. Valencia CF, the city's main club, has a long and distinguished record in Spanish and European football. Their training ground and academy, known as the Paterna Training Complex, has produced and developed a number of talented players over the years. When David Silva arrived at Valencia's academy as a teenager, he entered one of the more competitive environments in Spanish youth football. There were talented players everywhere. The standard was high. And for a small, quiet boy from the Canary Islands, it required adjustment. He was physically slight. In youth football, physical development often determines outcomes, and David was sometimes at a disadvantage against stronger, more physically developed opponents. But those who watched him closely could see that his technical ability was exceptional. His first touch was clean and instinctive. His passing was precise. His movement off the ball was quiet, but intelligent. Valencia's academy coaches were patient enough to look past the physical limitations and see the player underneath. They gave David time to develop. They worked with him on his game. And gradually, as he moved through the academy age groups, he began to establish himself. His progress was steady rather than sudden. He did not burst onto the scene. He developed quietly and consistently, which in many ways was entirely in keeping with the player he would eventually become. By the time David reached his late teenage years, he was considered one of the more promising players in Valencia's youth system. The club believed he had a future in professional football, but like most young players, he would need to take a few steps before reaching Valencia's first team. The first step was a loan spell. In Spanish football, it is common for young players to gain experience at lower division clubs on loan before returning to their parent club. These loan spells serve an important purpose. Training is one thing. Actual competitive professional football is something else entirely. The pace is different. The physical demands are different. The mental pressure is different. In the 2003 to 2004 season, David Silva was loaned to SD Eibar, a club from the Basque Country in northern Spain, competing in the second division of Spanish football. Eibar is a small industrial town, quite different from the coastal warmth of the Canary Islands or Valencia. The football was competitive and direct. David was 17 years old. He was playing professional football for the first time in a division where the game was tough and unforgiving. It was an important test. He managed it well. The experience of regular competitive football was exactly what he needed. He played. He learned. He kept the ball moving calmly, even in difficult situations. The rhythm of professional football began to feel more familiar. There is something important about those early loan spells that is easy to overlook when the story is told later, with all the trophies already won. At 17, David Silva was a long way from home. He had moved from the warmth of the Canary Islands to Valencia, and then from Valencia to a small industrial town in the Basque Country. The football was tough. The conditions were not glamorous. The crowds were modest. But none of that seemed to trouble him. He found ways to play well, regardless of the setting. He found ways to contribute, even when the football around him was less refined than what his technical ability might have preferred. That adaptability, the ability to function calmly in different environments, was a quality that would serve him for his entire career. He returned to Valencia and then went out on loan again. This time to RC Celta Vigo, a club from the northwestern Spanish city of Vigo, competing in La Liga, the Spanish top flight. Vigo is a port city on the Atlantic coast of Galicia. It rains there more than it does in Valencia or the Canary Islands. The landscape is green and grey and oceanic. There is a kind of quiet beauty to it, though it is very different from the bright southern warmth David had grown up in. Celta Vigo was a different challenge again. La Liga football was faster, more technical, more tactically demanding. David was now playing against some of the best players in Spain each week. He was still very young, just 18, but the standard was much higher. He adapted. He continued to develop his ability to find and use space. He continued to refine his passing and his movement. He was quiet on the pitch, but effective. Those who were watching his development could see that something special was emerging. What was emerging was a player who had learned, through those 2 loan experiences, that football could be played well in different conditions, at different levels, against different kinds of opponents. He had gained competitive experience. He had gained confidence. And he had done it quietly, without fuss, in the way that was entirely characteristic of him. By the mid-2000s, David Silva had returned to Valencia and was working his way into the first team. Valencia, during this period, was one of the stronger clubs in Spanish football. They had won La Liga in 2002 and 2004 under the management of Rafael Benitez. They were a competitive, well-organized club with genuine quality throughout the squad. David began making first-team appearances for Valencia in the 2004 to 2005 season. He was being introduced gradually, given minutes from the bench, developing his understanding of first-team football at the highest domestic level. His game during this period was already characterized by qualities that would define his entire career. He was technically excellent, clean first touch, precise short passing, comfortable receiving the ball in tight spaces. He moved intelligently without the ball, always looking for positions where he could be useful. And he had a calmness on the ball that was rare in young players. He did not rush. He did not force things. He waited for the right moment. And then he used it. Over the following seasons, David established himself as a key player in Valencia's midfield and attacking line. He was not a traditional midfielder in the sense of sitting deep and directing play from distance. He was a player who liked to operate in the spaces between defensive lines, in the half spaces, in the pockets just behind the striker. He was difficult to mark because he moved constantly and unpredictably. And when he received the ball, he could quickly turn pressure into opportunity. His ability to dribble in tight spaces was particularly notable. He was not a sprinter. He would never outrun a defender in a straight line. But with the ball at his feet, in a crowded midfield or near the edge of the penalty area, he had a low center of gravity and an exceptional sense of balance that allowed him to slip past opponents with small economic movements. He did not need space. He could create it himself. Valencia supporters recognized his talent early. They appreciated the elegance of his play, the intelligence behind every movement. He was not the most physically impressive player on the pitch. But when things were difficult, when the team needed someone to hold the ball and find a solution, David was often the one who provided it. In the 2007 to 2008 season, Valencia won the Copa del Rey, Spain's domestic cup competition. It was a significant achievement for the club and for the squad that had been building together over several seasons. David Silva was an important part of that squad. He had become a regular starter, a player central to how Valencia built and created in attack. The Copa del Rey victory was the kind of team achievement that reflects months of effort and consistency. The kind of thing a young player carries with them, a first major honor, a confirmation that the work has been meaningful. By this point, David was also beginning to attract wider attention. His performances for Valencia were being noticed beyond Spain. European clubs were aware of him, and the Spanish national team had begun to take notice too. Spain's national football team had been developing something remarkable through the mid-2000s. Under coach Luis Aragonés, and then Vicente del Bosque, Spain assembled a group of technically gifted players who were among the best in the world at their positions. Players like Xavi Hernández, Andrés Iniesta, Fernando Torres, David Villa, Sergio Ramos, and Iker Casillas. Together, they formed what became known as one of the greatest international squads of the modern era. David Silva was part of that generation. He had come through Spain's youth and under-21 teams, and by the mid-2000s, he was a regular fixture in the senior squad. What made Spain's team of that era so distinctive was their commitment to a particular style of play: short passes, movement, patience, technical precision, control of the ball, control of the tempo, control of the game. This was a style that suited David perfectly. His gifts, his ability to keep the ball, to move it quickly, to find space in small areas, were exactly the qualities the Spanish system was built around. He was not always the most prominent name in the squad. With players like Xavi and Iniesta in the same midfield, the spotlight was often elsewhere. But those who understood the game could see how important David's presence was. He provided another option, another connection point, another quiet intelligence working within the system. In the summer of 2008, Spain competed in the UEFA European Championship, held across Austria and Switzerland. They were among the favourites, but international tournaments have a way of creating pressure and unpredictability that can unsettle even the best sides. Spain were outstanding. They played with a fluency and confidence that their opponents found difficult to handle. The passing was quick and intelligent. The movement off the ball was constant. And in the final, played in Vienna against Germany, Spain won 1-0. Fernando Torres scored the only goal. David Silva was part of the squad, contributing through the tournament. It was Spain's first major international trophy in 44 years. The celebration was enormous. For the players, it was the confirmation of something they had believed in for a long time. 2 years later came the World Cup. The 2010 FIFA World Cup was held in South Africa. It was a tournament of significant symbolism. The first World Cup played on African soil. The atmosphere was distinctive, the football sometimes uncertain, but Spain progressed through the competition with a controlled, measured authority. They did not always win easily. There were close matches, moments of difficulty. Spain lost their opening group game against Switzerland, which created some anxiety and external doubt. But the squad stayed composed. They trusted their way of playing. They kept the ball, found spaces, and gradually wore down opponents with patience rather than power. David Silva scored a crucial goal against Honduras in the group stage, a composed finish after a smooth move. Against Germany in the semi-final, Spain won 1-0 thanks to a powerful header from Carles Puyol. David Silva again contributed with his calm movement and intelligent use of space as Spain advanced to the final. The final, against the Netherlands in Johannesburg, was a difficult and physical match. It went to extra time. And then, in the 116th minute, Andres Iniesta scored to win the World Cup for Spain, 1-0. It was the first time Spain had ever won the World Cup. The celebration was immense. The players embraced on the pitch in Johannesburg, the streets of Spanish cities filled with people. It was a moment of genuine historical weight. David Silva had been part of it, not simply as a squad player, but as an active contributor through the tournament. He had scored goals. He had moved the ball with his characteristic calm intelligence. He had been exactly the kind of player the Spanish system needed. And then, 2 years after that, came Euro 2012, held across Poland and Ukraine. Euro 2012 was perhaps Spain's most dominant performance of the three major tournaments. They were the defending champions of both the European Championship and the World Cup. They were the best team in the world, and they played like it. In the final, held in Kiev, Spain defeated Italy 4-0. It was a remarkable performance in a major final, a result that spoke to just how complete that Spanish generation had become. David Silva opened the scoring with a composed finish, and the tone was set from there. 3 major international tournaments, 3 victories. It was one of the most successful runs by any national team in football history. And David Silva had been present through all of it, a consistent and important part of a team that will be remembered for a very long time. By the time Spain won the World Cup in 2010, David Silva had already been identified as one of the most sought-after players in European football. Multiple top clubs had expressed interest. The summer of 2010 would turn out to be the moment of his next significant transition. Manchester City came calling. Manchester City, in the summer of 2010, were a club in the process of transformation. New ownership had arrived in 2008, the Abu Dhabi United Group, headed by Sheikh Mansour, bringing with them significant financial resources and an ambition to make Manchester City one of the best clubs in the world. The previous 2 seasons had seen large investments in players, but the club had not yet won a major trophy. They were building. They were learning. They needed the right kind of players to take the next step. David Silva joined Manchester City in the summer of 2010 for a reported fee of around £26 million. He signed a 5-year contract. He was 24 years old. For a player who had grown up on the warm Atlantic coast of Gran Canaria, Manchester was a significant adjustment. The weather was different. The language was different. The culture was different. The football was different, more direct, more physical, faster in some ways than the measured rhythms of La Liga. Manchester is a city of considerable energy. The football culture there is intense and deeply rooted. 2 major clubs share the same city, and the competition for attention and affection is constant. For a new arrival, particularly one who was naturally quiet and private, settling into that environment required patience. David did not make a great public display of any of it. He came, he trained, he played. He found a routine. He became familiar with the training ground at Carrington, with the rhythms of the Premier League, with the demands of playing in England. One of the first adjustments was the physical pace of the game. The Premier League of that era was known for its intensity, the pressing, the directness, the physical challenges that opponents brought in virtually every match. For a technically gifted player who relied on movement and timing rather than power and speed, it required a specific kind of adaptation. David found that adaptation through his positioning. Rather than trying to match the physical intensity around him, he learned, as he always had, to be in the right place before the ball arrived, to be available, to be free, to make the game easier for the players around him by always offering a clear option, a simple pass, a way out of pressure. And almost immediately, it became clear that he was something special in the context of English football. In the Premier League of that era, there were plenty of technically gifted players, but David brought a particular combination of qualities that was relatively rare. His ability to receive the ball in tight spaces and emerge from pressure was exceptional. His passing in small areas was precise and inventive. His movement was intelligent and constant, always creating options for teammates. And his calmness, that fundamental, defining calmness, gave City's play a steadiness that they had previously lacked. He wore the number 21 shirt. He operated primarily in the left half space of City's midfield, though he was flexible enough to adapt to different positions within the team's structure. He quickly became one of the most important players in the squad. The Manchester City supporters took to him quickly, not because he was flashy or dramatic. He was neither of those things, but because he was effective in a way that was beautiful to watch. The small movements, the quick first touch, the precise little pass that opened up space that hadn't seemed to exist. They called him El Mago, the magician, and the name felt appropriate, even if his magic was the quiet, understated kind. In his first season at Manchester City, 2010 to 2011, David helped the club win the FA Cup. It was City's first major trophy since 1976. The final, played at Wembley against Stoke City, ended 1-0. It was not a spectacular match, but it was a meaningful one. It was the beginning of something. The following season, 2011 to 2012, would become one of the most famous in Manchester City's history. City had assembled a squad of genuine quality. Roberto Mancini was the manager, working to bring tactical organisation to a group of talented individuals. The squad included players like Vincent Kompany, Yaya Touré, Sergio Aguero, Carlos Tevez, Joe Hart, Pablo Zabaleta, and David Silva, who by this point had become one of the first names on the team sheet. The Premier League title race that season was extraordinary. Manchester City and Manchester United were closely matched throughout the campaign. By the final day, the two clubs were level on points, with City ahead only on goal difference. City's final match was at home to Queen's Park Rangers. United were playing Sunderland away. What followed is now one of the most famous matches in English football history. City were losing. With minutes remaining, they were trailing 2-1, and United were winning their match. The title appeared to be slipping away. And then, in stoppage time, Edin Dzeko equalised. And then, with virtually the last moment of the season, Sergio Aguero scored to make it 3-2. Manchester City were champions. The explosion of noise that followed that goal, at the Etihad Stadium and across Manchester, was one of the great sounds of English football. The relief, the disbelief, the joy, all of it at once. David Silva had been a central figure throughout that entire season. His performances in the league had been consistently excellent. He had created goals, controlled tempo, and provided the kind of quiet midfield excellence that makes an entire team function more smoothly. He did not score the famous final goal, but the season had been built on hundreds of moments like his. Precise, intelligent, unremarkable in isolation, but essential in aggregate. It was the first time Manchester City had won the league title since 1968, 44 years. The city celebrated accordingly. The seasons that followed saw Manchester City establish themselves as one of the dominant forces in English football. They won another Premier League title in 2013 to 2014. They were consistently in the upper reaches of the table, and David Silva remained central to everything they did. His style of play did not change dramatically over the years. He remained what he had always been, a quiet, intelligent, technically precise midfielder who used the ball beautifully and moved with an economy of effort that masked the intensity of his thinking. He did not run farther than he needed to. He did not attempt passes that weren't on. He was economical in all things: movement, energy, decision-making. But within that economy, there was constant quality. Season after season, he produced performances of consistent excellence. The Premier League became accustomed to him. Opposition managers knew what he would bring, knew the problems he would create, and still found it difficult to stop him. The combination of technical skill and intelligent movement meant that even in matches where he was specifically targeted and pressured, he found ways to be effective. He was not a loud presence. In the dressing room, he was quiet. In interviews, he was modest. He did not seek attention or cultivate a public profile. He was there to play football, and playing football was what he did. Season after season, with the same calm dedication. In the summer of 2016, Manchester City appointed Pep Guardiola as their new manager. Guardiola, who had previously managed Barcelona and Bayern Munich, was considered one of the finest football coaches in the world. He was known for demanding the highest technical standards and for constructing teams that played a particular kind of fluid, intelligent, possession-based football. David Silva and Pep Guardiola's philosophies were a natural match. The kind of football Guardiola wanted: precise passing, intelligent movement, control through technique rather than physicality, was exactly the kind of football David had always played. Under Guardiola, he found an environment that perfectly suited his strengths. City's football under Guardiola became increasingly sophisticated and increasingly dominant. The 2017 to 2018 season was particularly remarkable. City won the Premier League with 100 points, a record at the time. They scored 106 goals. They played with a level of consistency that made them look, at times, almost unbeatable. David Silva was at the heart of it. His ability to control tempo, to slow the game when City needed calm, to speed it up when they needed to attack, to find the passing angle that kept the ball moving through pressure, was essential to how Guardiola's City functioned. He was now in his early 30s. The years were passing, but his quality had not diminished. If anything, he had become more refined with age. The things he had always done well, he now did with even greater certainty. The first touch that killed the ball instantly. The pass that arrived exactly where it needed to. The movement that opened space for a teammate. All of it still there. Still reliable. Still beautiful. There was a period during the 2017 to 2018 season that showed a different side of David Silva. His son, Matteo, was born prematurely and spent weeks in hospital. It was a deeply personal and difficult time for David and his partner. He missed some matches during this period, travelling back and forth between Manchester and Spain to be with his family. The Manchester City supporters responded with warmth and understanding. His teammates supported him. The club supported him. And when he returned to training and to matches, the quiet support he had received seemed to reinforce something, that David Silva was not only respected as a footballer, but genuinely liked as a person. He did not speak publicly at length about that period. That was in keeping with his character. He was a private person, reserved about personal matters. But when Matteo recovered and was healthy, the relief and joy were visible. He dedicated a goal to his son, lifting his shirt to reveal a message. It was one of the rare moments when the private David Silva became briefly visible to the world. The years continued to pass. City won more titles. Silva continued to play with the same elegant efficiency. The team changed around him. New players arrived, some departing. The squad constantly evolving under Guardiola's direction. But David remained a constant. In the 2018 to 2019 season, Manchester City won the Premier League again, along with the FA Cup and the League Cup, a domestic treble. It was an extraordinary achievement. David was a key contributor throughout the campaign, even as his role evolved slightly to accommodate the changing demands placed on him by age and the development of younger players around him. By this point, it was widely understood that David Silva was approaching the end of his time at Manchester City. His contract was running down. He would be 34 by the end of his final season at the club. When a player has been at a club for a decade, their departure changes something. Not only in the practical sense, finding someone to replace them, restructuring the squad, but in terms of atmosphere and identity. Some players become so embedded in a club's culture that their absence creates a kind of silence. David Silva was that kind of player at Manchester City. He had arrived in 2010 when the project was still finding its shape. He had been there through the first title in 2012, through the lean years and the successful ones, through the arrival of different managers, different playing systems, different generations of teammates. He had seen the club grow from a team with genuine ambition and financial resources into a team with institutional excellence. And through all of it, he had remained steady, reliable, consistently, quietly excellent. Younger players who had come to City in the later years of his time there had grown up watching him. For some of them, he was already a legend of the club before they had ever trained alongside him. And then they trained alongside him, and they discovered that the legend was just a man who took his work seriously and did it very well, every single day. That ordinariness of dedication, the fact that excellence for David was simply the result of consistent, careful work, may have been one of the most valuable things he gave to the players around him. Not inspiration through drama, but example through routine. The 2019 to 2020 season was his last. He announced in advance that he would be leaving at the end of the season, and the announcement was received with widespread appreciation across the football world, not just at City, but across the sport. People who had watched him play for a decade or more took a moment to appreciate what was coming to an end. He won another Premier League title in that final season, the 2018 to 2019 campaign, meaning he left the club as a champion. He had won 4 Premier League titles with Manchester City, 2 FA Cups, and 5 League Cups. By any measure, it was a career of extraordinary achievement. His final match for Manchester City came in the FA Cup quarter-final replay against Newcastle United in March 2020. A match that was later identified as the last before football was suspended due to the pandemic. It was not the farewell he he or the club had planned, but football rarely accommodates perfect endings. The tribute paid to him by Manchester City, by the club, by his teammates, by the supporters, was substantial and sincere. He had been there for a decade. He had helped build something from the foundations up. His number 21 shirt was not retired outright, but the acknowledgement of his contribution was unmistakable. Pep Guardiola, who is not a man inclined toward excessive sentiment, described David Silva as the best player he had ever managed. It was a notable thing to say from a manager who had worked with Lionel Messi, Xavi, Iniesta, Ribéry, Müller, and others. But Guardiola felt it was true, and many who had watched David Silva play understood why. After leaving Manchester City, David returned to Spain. He joined Real Sociedad, a club based in San Sebastian, in the Basque Country in northern Spain. It was a move that brought him back to his home country, to a club with a genuine footballing culture and a clear identity. Real Sociedad had been developing into one of the more attractive sides in La Liga. Their style of play, technical, organized, possession-oriented, was well suited to what David brought. He signed a 2-year contract and arrived with the quiet expectation that he could contribute meaningfully even in the later stage of his career. He made his debut for Real Sociedad in the 2020 to 2021 season. The transition back to Spanish football was natural. The pace was different from the Premier League, more measured in some ways, and David adjusted without difficulty. He remained a cultured presence in midfield. Younger teammates found him a calming influence, a player who had won everything, seen everything, and yet continued to go about his work with the same quiet dedication. His standards had not dropped. His quality in possession remained high. His movement remained intelligent. There was something instructive about watching David Silva in his early 30s at Real Sociedad. For many players, the later years of a career are characterized by a gradual narrowing of what they can do. The sprint becomes slower. The recovery takes longer. The game begins to ask for things the body can no longer fully provide. David's response to that narrowing was to refine rather than diminish. He became, if anything, more economical, more selective. He chose his moments with greater care. He moved less, but thought more. And because the thinking had always been the central quality of his game, the effect was not a lesser version of what he had been, but a slightly different version, still precise, still intelligent, still capable of the pass that changed a moment. Real Sociedad qualified for European competition during his time at the club. They competed in the UEFA Europa League, and later in the UEFA Champions League. It was further evidence that the club had grown into a genuinely competitive side, and David's presence had been part of that journey. He also helped Real Sociedad win the Copa del Rey in 2020, which he collected in the delayed final, played in April 2021, a trophy that added another chapter to a career already rich with honours. It was his second Copa del Rey, the first having come with Valencia more than a decade earlier. A career bookended, in its domestic moments, by Spanish Cup victories. But football at the highest level asks a great deal of the body, and by 2022, David was dealing with a significant knee injury. The injury required surgery and a lengthy rehabilitation period. At 36 years old, recovery from such an injury is a slow and uncertain process. He worked through it with the same patience and steadiness that had defined his career. Rehabilitation is a quiet, unglamorous part of professional football. Hours of careful exercise, gradual progress, the repeated testing of what the body can and cannot do. It lacks the visibility of match performance, but it requires a different kind of discipline, a different kind of dedication. By early 2022, it had become clear that the injury had effectively ended his career. Real Sociedad announced in January 2022 that David Silva would not play again for the club. At 35 years old, he retired from professional football. The announcement brought tributes from across the football world. From Manchester City, where the memories were deep and plentiful. From the Spanish Football Federation, where his contributions to 3 international triumphs were remembered with genuine pride. From former teammates who had played alongside him at Valencia, at Spain, at City, and at Real Sociedad. From supporters across different countries and different clubs. The tributes were warm, but not excessive. They reflected the man himself. Calm, respectful, appreciative of what had been achieved without excess drama or noise. When you try to summarize what David Silva was as a footballer, the numbers are significant, but they do not capture the full picture. In his 10 seasons at Manchester City, he made more than 430 appearances, scoring over 70 goals and providing well over 100 assists. He won 4 Premier League titles, 2 FA Cups, and 5 League Cups. He was named in the PFA Team of the Year on several occasions. He was consistently rated among the best players in the Premier League across a decade. With Spain, he won 2 European Championships and a World Cup. He was part of 3 consecutive major international tournament victories, a run of success that no national team had ever achieved in quite the same way. But the statistics, as helpful as they are, do not tell you what it felt like to watch him play. What the statistics cannot capture is the quality of a single pass, the weight of it, the timing of it, the way it arrived in exactly the right place at exactly the right moment. They cannot capture the small economic movements off the ball that constantly created new angles for his teammates. They cannot capture the way he received the ball under pressure and made it look effortless. The clean first touch in a tight space, the quick turn with no wasted motion, the gentle, precise delivery into the path of a forward. David Silva did not play football loudly. He did not celebrate extravagantly. He did not demand attention. He simply played, match after match, year after year, with a level of consistent, quiet excellence that set him apart from almost everyone else of his generation. There is something worth lingering on in the simplicity of that description. Match after match, year after year, a decade at one club, another 2 seasons back in Spain. And throughout all of it, the same qualities visible from the beginning. The same first touch, the same movement, the same intelligence in tight spaces, the same calm. Maintaining that level of consistency across such a long time is not simply a matter of talent. Talent gets a player to the top level, but sustaining excellence across 15 or 16 professional seasons requires something else. It requires a relationship with the work that goes deeper than ambition or external recognition. It requires genuinely caring about doing things well, regardless of the circumstances. Whether the match matters enormously or very little, whether the press are watching closely or not, whether the team is winning comfortably or struggling. David Silva seemed to have that relationship with football from very early on. It was visible in how he played at Eibar at 17, in a second division Spanish ground with modest attendance. It was visible a decade and a half later, in the final months of his career at Real Sociedad. The care was constant. The standards were consistent. The work was always there. That quality, the quiet, consistent dedication to craft, is perhaps his deepest legacy. Not the trophies, not the assists, not the statistics, but the example of a player who found a way to be excellent for a very long time by being thoughtful rather than spectacular, intelligent rather than forceful, calm rather than intense. In a sport that often rewards power and speed, he succeeded through intelligence. In a game that can become hectic and chaotic, he brought calm. In a decade at one of the most scrutinized clubs in world football, under the constant attention of the media and the expectations of supporters, he remained composed, modest, and professional. He was not someone who sought the spotlight. He was someone who did his work carefully, who cared deeply about playing well, who took his responsibilities seriously without ever making a performance of it. The supporters who watched him at the Etihad Stadium over those 10 years grew accustomed to something that is actually quite rare in football, a player whose presence made you feel that things were going to be all right, not because he was the most athletic player on the pitch, or the loudest, or the most visible, but because when he had the ball, there was a calmness to everything, a sense of control, a feeling that the next right thing was about to happen. That feeling, difficult to describe but easy to recognize, was one of the greatest gifts David Silva gave to everyone who watched him. He made difficult things look simple, and in doing so, he made watching football feel easy and calm and pleasant. There are footballers who make you anxious. Footballers whose brilliance is expressed through tension and drama and the constant possibility of failure. And then there are footballers like David Silva, rare and valuable, whose quality creates the opposite feeling. Peace, confidence, a steady, reassuring sense that the game is in good hands. He was one of those players. He may be one of the finest examples of that kind of player that the modern game has ever produced. Somewhere in Gran Canaria right now, the Atlantic Ocean is moving slowly in the darkness. The warm coastal air drifts in from the water. The streets of small towns are quiet. The lights along the shore reflect softly on the water. The harbour at Arguinegin sits still. The fishing boats rest in the water. The temperature is mild, the way it almost always is on that island, because the Atlantic moderates everything. The heat of summer, the chill of winter. Everything is gently balanced there. Everything sits within a range that is comfortable and calm. It is the kind of night that a young boy might have played in, years and years ago. A ball on the ground. A small pitch. A few friends. The sound of the ocean not far away. And in that unremarkable, ordinary setting, in those small-sided games on warm evenings, something was developing. A particular kind of awareness. A particular kind of patience. A way of seeing the game that was entirely his own. David Silva grew up on that island, and he carried something of it with him throughout his career. The calm, the unhurried intelligence, the sense that there is always time, if you look for it correctly. He took that quality to the training grounds of Valencia, where coaches saw something in a slight, quiet teenager from the Canary Islands. He took it to the great Spanish national team, where it found its most perfect expression in an era of international football that may never be repeated. He took it to Manchester, to rain and cold, and the noise of the Premier League, and it never left him. For a decade in England, he was one of the most elegant players in the country. He was not the most famous. He was not the loudest. But those who understood football, who watched carefully, who paid attention to the small things rather than only the dramatic ones, knew what they were seeing. They were seeing El Mago, the quiet magician from the Atlantic coast, The player who slowed the game down simply by being in it. The ball moves from foot to foot, across a training pitch in the morning light, the dew still on the grass. Short passes between midfielders. One touch, then another. The sound is soft and steady. The rhythm is calm. No one is rushing. No one needs to. The ball finds its way through the players, like water finding a path, easy and unhurried. One midfielder receives, turns, passes. Another collects, holds, releases. The ball circles and moves and comes back again. It is not complicated. It is just football, played with care and patience. This is what David Silva always did. This is what all those years of football looked like from close up. Not spectacle, but craft. Not performance, but play. Simple, careful, beautiful play. And now you can rest. The story has been told, from the warm coast of Gran Canaria to the roar of the Etihad Stadium, to the quiet of retirement. A full life in football. A career built on patience and intelligence. A legacy written not in volume, but in quality. Let the images settle gently. The calm streets of Arguinegin, the warm evening air, the sound of the Atlantic. A young boy learning how the ball moves, learning how space opens and closes, learning the quiet game within the game, and then the years moving slowly forward. Valencia, Spain, Manchester, the trophies gathering quietly, without fuss. The passes finding their targets year after year. The midfield moving smoothly, like water finding its level. The light fading slowly over the training ground. The ball rolling to a stop on the grass. The session finished. The players drifting slowly toward the changing rooms. A quiet word between teammates. The sound of studs on the hard surface of the tunnel. And somewhere, always, the ocean. The slow and steady presence of the Atlantic. The way it always was on the island where he was born. The tide coming in and going out. The way it has done for longer than any of us can imagine. Calm and reliable. Patient and constant. That is the feeling David Silva leaves behind. Not the noise of a goal or the brightness of a trophy, but something quieter, something more lasting. The feeling that good things are possible when you are patient enough to wait for them. David Silva, El Mago, gentle, intelligent, elegant, one of the finest of his generation. Let your breathing slow, let the thoughts settle. Let the story carry you the rest of the way. The night is quiet. There is nothing left to do. Just rest now.